Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we come together to talk about this critical topic about setting freshwater science-based targets and taking action for nature. I'm your host, Alan Townsend, Senior Program Officer for WWF US, and I also have the privilege of serving as the co-lead for SBTN's Freshwater Hub. And today, as we delve into this important and urgent topic, it's crucial to appreciate the profound impact that business can have in addressing the freshwater challenge. Today, we'll look at how companies can promote resilient freshwater systems and sustainable practices, as well as the opportunity to collectively ensure the availability of clean and abundant water for all. Thank you for your attention, and let's begin the conversation. So for today, I'm going to welcome our speakers and panelists. Then I'll set the scene for SBTN. We'll then go into a waterside chat with our panelists about their experience participating in SBTN's recent target validation pilot. I'll briefly cover recent methodological updates to the guidance and insights from the pilot. We'll then introduce SBTN's basin threshold tool, and then we'll close with some Q&A. All right, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Alan Townsend. Other speakers that we'll have today are my colleagues, Angela Bowman, Director of Freshwater Food Systems and Metrics for WWF, and then Rebecca Farm, Director at River Features. We'll also have a panelist, Michi Seta, General Manager in Sustainable Management Division at Suntory, Katie Finsom, Associate Director, Water and Agricultural Supply Chains at Biodiversify, and then Marie Ann Paulin, Water and Agriculture Manager at Danone. All right, so we'll get into setting the scene. So SBTN is organized by hubs that cover 5 key action areas: freshwater, land, ocean, biodiversity, alongside climate with SBTI. And our purpose is to enable companies to take the right actions in the right places at the right time and do their part to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. To enable companies to set targets, SBTN has designed a 5-step approach that builds on existing corporate practices. The iterative process takes companies from assessing their impacts on nature throughout their value chains in step 1 to identifying what parts of their business and which locations they should focus on in step 2, to set targets in step 3 and implementing actions to meet these in step 4, and then finally monitoring, reporting, and verifying progress in step 5. The technical guidance is aligned to the 5-step target setting process, and at the core of SBTN's guidance are the technical methods. Part of the value proposition for science-based targets for nature is that the approach begins with companies comprehensively assessing their impacts on nature across freshwater, land, ocean, biodiversity, and climate, so they can understand where their impacts are and what to address first. And they are prescriptive, and so they provide a clear set of steps for companies to move through the guidance, including taking the guesswork out of estimating impacts, prioritizing locations for action, and giving companies a clear sense of what needs to be done, and also improves their ability to compare among sites and products and business lines. So today, I'm giving an overview of the guidance, but today we'll focus on freshwater in step 3. So the Freshwater Hub is a collaborative effort to develop technical guidance. The Freshwater Hub is co-led by WWF and CDP, along with Pacific Institute, World Resources Institute, and the Nature Conservancy. And here I just want to take a moment to pause. There's a number of folks that have been put a tremendous amount of investment and time into this effort, and just recognize some of the Freshwater Hub members here in the room. If you don't mind maybe standing up or raising your hand. We have Guy in here. I see Angela, Claudia, Nabia. I think that's it that we have here, and I'm sure there's a ton on the audience. Thank you, Nabia. We also wanted to thank our technical support, Limnotech, a few of their representatives here in the room. Thank you for that. And then our philanthropic supporters, the Walton Family Foundation and the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. So where we are today, so to get to this point, the freshwater guidance has gone through several iterations and pilots. And back in 2020, SBTN produced or released the initial guidance for business. And since that time, the Freshwater Hub and SBTN and the other hubs have been iterating on the guidance from then. We've had, as several of you have participated, or a lot of you have participated in this process through the technical advisory groups and practitioner advisory groups back in 2021, the freshwater pilots that we conducted back in, also in 2021 with Procter & Gamble, General Mills, and Suntory, who is here to speak today. We had an expert review panel, 2022, a public consultation. Thank you all for, if you've provided comments, for helping us get to this stage. We also released V1 last May. And then most recently, we've wrapped up a target validation pilot where companies move through steps 1, 2, and 3 of the process. And then in step 3, freshwater and land to understand what the validation process will look like and help build out the submission process. SBTN has announced recently that Accountability Accelerator will be handling the validation service, and more information will be coming out about that. But that represents kind of like the part of the ecosystem to science-based targets. And then today we'll also talk about updates to the guidance. So with that, move to, one more slide. Just a little bit more about the pilot. So as I mentioned earlier, SBTN has led the target validation pilot with 17 companies, some of whom set the first science-based targets for nature. We anticipate that summary outcomes will be coming out next month. And looking ahead, approximately 150 additional companies are preparing to set targets, and the target validation process will open later this year. Okay. All right. So with that, I invite our panelists up for a Q&A. Thank you. Hi. All right. Thank you all for joining me for this session. So, this part of the session is going to focus on version 1 of the guidance. As I mentioned, there's a version 1.1 that released more recently from that time, but I'm going to ask the panelists to talk about their experience as part of the pilot. So first, I'll start off with Marianne and Hiramichi. Could you give us some brief insight into your company's reasoning for engaging in the science-based targets pathway?
Yeah. Thank you for your introduction, Alain. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Hiramichi Seta, working for Suntory Holdings as a Senior General Manager and the Biodiversity and Water Sustainability Lead. Today, I'm very honored to be here today and to share our science-based target journeys. Suntory was established in Japan in 1899 by founder Shinjiro Torii, who built Japan's first whiskey distillery in Yamazaki, Kyoto in 1923. The Japanese whiskey brand, Yamazaki and Hibiki, may be familiar to whiskey lovers on the floor. But actually, I know you are the SBTN lovers because today there is a very nice, beautiful Stockholm morning, but you are here. Yeah, it's a amazing time. Today, we have a global unique portfolio of businesses, including spirits, beer, wine, and soft drinks, and health food. Suntory set our purpose to inspire the brilliance of life by creating rich experiences in harmony with nature as corporate philosophy. The purpose mentioned, Suntory's business is based on transforming the gifts of nature, such as water and various agricultural ingredients, into value, following customers' needs in the time and the region in which they are used. Therefore, working toward the sustainability of nature and water as a source of value for customers in Suntory's core business activities. In Japan, Suntory has been working for over 20 years to conserve the forest in the groundwater recharge areas. It's shared with local communities based on a scientific approach. Today, we are preserving forests covering an area of approximately 12,000 hectares, more than double the amount of groundwater withdrawn from direct operation sites in Japan. This activity also creates a nesting environment for birds of prey at the top of the ecological pyramid and supports their breeding. In this way, even before the term nature positive was widely used in the world, Suntory took a scientific approach to protecting water and nature. Now, as an integrated new methodology called SBTs for nature is being developed, we aim to raise our approach level. So we participated in this pilot to become the first practitioners of this approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So nice to meet you all. Thank you for the invitation. Marianne Paulin, so I'm indeed leading the water and agriculture and also now the biodiversity topics in the sustainability global team. Just wanted to kind of set the scene as you saw in the different companies. It's our European plant-based drinks, Alpro, who committed to SBTN, not Danone for now. We really wanted to have the time to go in depth in what SBTN can encompass, what SBTN can provide us as a business. Also, because it makes sense, Alpro was the one who volunteered to do this piloting, as it was founded in the 80s by and with the conviction that there exists a better way to feed the world, being one of the, even if it's not the first brand to provide some alternative product on the market back then. Just to say that we are not starting from scratch, because we have already some biodiversity operations activities. We also have some commitments with our almond plant-based drinks that needs to come as from like mostly rain-fed farming. And the last one is about indeed soy for our soy plant-based drink as well, soy being certified as non-GMO and of course non-deforested. So we really used the leverage of SBT. Why? Because from a mindset to do what we know was good for the planet, we shifted to a science-based approach to be in line with the planetary boundaries. And it's kind of back and forth, an iterative process of, okay, how a company interacts with nature and how the nature can impact the companies and the businesses, provides us a lot of information, a lot of prioritization as well, which today is very important for us. And I would just end on the fact that we really acknowledge the fact there is a need to have a scientific and to have an overall framework, a holistic one, that can help business to really set the right targets based on local context and based on what is the most urgent to do.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Katie, I turn to you. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your experience in working with companies and setting targets with local data, and what were some of the successes and some of the challenges that you observed in that process.
Definitely. So I'm Katie Fensom from Biodiversify, where we worked with a couple of the pilot companies, Wholesome, who's a construction company, and Caring, a large luxury fashion house. And the pilot started in around spring last year, and we had the task of supporting them on steps 1 through 3 on all of those. So the first thing to do was steps 1 and 2 ask you to look at a range of pressures on biodiversity, so the things that drive biodiversity loss, which includes water use, but also things like climate change, land use and land use change, pollution, to predict or try to measure it with primary data what those pressures are around the world, and then to compare that with the state of nature. So actually what is kind of the health of the ecosystem in those locations. So we did that process, and that took us up until sort of late summer to do all of that, because obviously if you're looking at your direct operations and your supply chain, that's quite a lot of global data to compare and bring together and to try to identify priority landscapes. And then we identified a few priority basins based on the pressure or estimated pressure of those locations when you're looking at upstream. Like very few people have primary data of actually what is the water pollution or water use in those locations. So we use primarily sort of LCA, XEO-based type data sets. And then identified a few places there that we could focus in for the local target setting with the local stakeholders. Once we got to that point, it was really a matter of trying to find who those people were that we could contact for those local data sets. So the SBTN asks you to find at least 3 stakeholders who would validate a local model for water use and water thresholds. Or have one stakeholder who's got a really strong evidence base that they can provide for that. So once we identified that basin, it was a matter of trying to find the local basin authority, which fortunately in the EU, there's a requirement to have those. So we did manage to identify that organization in the basin and then try to scrape the internet for email addresses. And we worked with our partner who had local language skills to try to facilitate those relationships. And that was actually quite challenging because although there are those authorities, and we also reached out to academic institutions and NGOs in the region to try and support this kind of breadth of data needs that you have, it was actually quite challenging to find the right person who could speak to us about that. It's not their normal remit of work. It's quite a new thing that's coming left field that they already have a busy schedule. So we got passed around the houses a little bit, which is, but amazingly, they did actually come through and provide us with data that we needed. We found it was a bit old and mismatched with the other parts of the data that we needed to combine to set those thresholds. So we then they said that they're actually updating it, and that would come out in December of that year. So we waited and bated our breath to try and get that local model until December, and then they said it would be January, so we waited until then. And then unfortunately, it didn't actually come through, so we had to revert to the global model, which is allowable within the SBTN process. So that's a bit of a description. I know that's a bit technical, but it's that's the process that we had to go through to comply by SBTN with our partners. And I'd say, in terms of challenges, I think it is the need to work with stakeholders, but also kind of have something back from them when there isn't necessarily an incentive for them to do that, and it's through kindness that they're doing that. And I think we can talk a bit more about that later, about what might next steps look like. But also, in terms of successes, I mean, the generosity that they had to work with us in the first place, I think that is really great. And I hope, through kind of more partnership and more collaboration, we'll be able to facilitate those and maybe see data brokerages, that mutually support both sides in the process.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Katie. And I'll highlight, as Katie alluded to in the process, we had a fairly short time period for executing the pilot and making sure we got through. And so obviously if there was more time, there'd be more time for the stakeholder consultation to bring in those data that they were developing over time. But I want to turn to Marianne and Hiramichi. I'm curious to hear about your experience through working through the stakeholder consultation process and how that might potentially contribute to collective action in a specific watershed or basin.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it's at the very core process in the target study. So, and in the freshwater target setting process in step 3, we prioritize the Kumamoto area in Kyushu, located in the south of Japan. We had previously developed our groundwater simulation model for the Kumamoto area. In 2023, we collaborated with the Kumamoto Groundwater Foundation to validate the model using location data on groundwater extraction over the previous 50 years. This was around the same time as the SBTs for Nature pilot, and Kumamoto was selected as a priority watershed. Therefore, we set targets for water quantity and quality based on dialogue with the Kumamoto University professor emeritus supervising the model, the Kumamoto Groundwater Foundation, and the related department of the Kumamoto Prefectural Government. Meanwhile, in the Kumamoto region, semiconductor factories from Japan and overseas, led by TSMC, moving into the area in search of a high-quality abundant groundwater. To achieve the groundwater recharge targets that the prefecture has set for companies, there is growing momentum in the region that says that in addition to traditional practice of flooded rice fields, it is necessary to achieve various measures such as thinning forests, maintaining grassland, and paved surfaces into green infrastructure in collaboration with a wide range of stakeholders. These measures, while challenging, promise a sustainable and prosperous future for the region. Therefore, Suntory is working with the local stakeholders to develop a framework for new collective action that goes beyond the scope of its planned SBTs target. We plan to propose effective recharge measures using the simulation model we developed to benefit the local community.
Yes, on our side, I would just start by saying that it's a long process, but which is needed because you can do all of the different analyses that you can run through. If you don't have the stakeholders that you are working with that are also kind of upskilled with all of the different material you have, you of course won't go and reach the collective action. By saying that, we have an internal and external engagement process. I will just emphasize on the external one. It was great. We have actually 2 different pilots, one for land and one for water. For both, we have gathered our suppliers, retailers, also the local authorities, the public bodies over there. And one of the first challenge for kind of having everybody put around the table and define the right goals is just to explain what is SBTN, because beside business ecosystem partners, SBTN is not that much known. So it was, for us, a good exercise to ensure that we are understanding, mastering what we are trying to do with SBTN. So yeah, it's really helped us kind of put the fish on the table, as we say in Danone, using a science-based angle, trying really here to enhance what is important for nature so that at the local economy development scale as well, we ensure sustainability. And us playing as part of a business player, but not the only one, also to take accountability and took actions on it.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Katie, I know you kind of already touched on this question. Is there anything maybe you want to add or kind of putting?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to separate slightly what the strict requirement of the SBTN is versus what's needed for a context-based target actually when you get going in the basin. So the technical requirement of the SBTN is to make sure that stakeholders have provided and sort of supported the models that you're using. But what you both have spoken to is the importance of supplier engagement and basin-wide engagement for when actually that target becomes something that you're about to implement. So there's the SBTN strict sort of semi-desk-based modeling type approach. But then actually when it gets to the fundamentals of working with a basin to make sure that something is workable for different parties in that group, it becomes more like a landscape or basin level engagement. And I think the suppliers really have to be involved in that process. A lot of the suppliers that we're working with and speaking to weren't necessarily aware that the company had existing water targets or they were part of this process. So they definitely need to be brought along to be supported and to provide that data and to share what their concerns would be, what's manageable for them, what the benefits for it would be for them, and to really strengthen that partnership with suppliers. And then also the parties in the basins, because what we were finding is it was coming a little bit left field because they weren't aware, like you said, about what SBTN is, but also have their existing basin management protocols. So it really needs to be integrated with that. And there are multiple groups who need to be engaged and aware of that process.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Marianne, and I'll start with you, and then Hiramichi. I'd be curious to hear how the process has influenced or shaped your action plans going forward.
Yes, so here I'm going to talk more on the internal stakeholder consultation as well. It was great to benefit from the SBTN framework, to have kind of a guidance that to our top management or more on the business side can as well be a great way to explain what sustainability can look like in short, medium and long term. It's kind of concrete. We have 7 targets, 3 for land, 4 for water. Which really are embedded into our overall sustainability journey in Danone. And thanks to that, we managed to build science-based business cases to reach out those different targets together, and like in parallel with some already piloting project I was briefly referring to just before, so that we have as well some key measurements on site together with a long-term and a bottom-up approach, which delivers these business cases that indeed kind of validate internally the buy-in and also unlock some resources to make it happen. But back to the collective action, it was also great to have this overall stakeholders consultation. Also, why? Because it unlocks some opportunities for co-financing, which is as well a great lever when you want to unlock resources internally for a business to run such projects. Still, it's a long process for which today there is not enough, really ready to use opportunities to make it, to turn the tide into something that is really much more concrete. So we are working on it, but yes, we will be there soon, hopefully.
Awesome.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to say that it's from the aspect of the kinds of data gatherings. In step 1, 2, and 2, there were issues with collecting some pressure data for direct operations. For example, Suntory has traditionally ensured that effluent water quality is kept below the regulatory values set by the local government where each plant is located. However, many plants mainly perform process management, and not all of them necessarily constantly monitor the quality of effluent water that result from their process. We plan to strengthen our data collection systems to comply with the SBTN, ISSB, and other requirements. In addition, Suntory, like many Japanese companies, relies on trading companies for its raw ingredient procurement, making it difficult to determine the location of farmland accurately in the supply chain. Therefore, we believe it is important to explore the creation of a robust data collection system in the context. And also, that kinds of data collection is important for the step maybe 4, so after our action and the catching the effectiveness. So that kinds of fundamental development is very important for us to conduct the SBTN steps.
Awesome. Okay, so we're at the let's say the final question here. Maybe go down the line, starting with you, Katie. I'd be curious what advice that you would give to other companies or other consultancies who are hesitant to kind of embark on this journey, and what perhaps advice you would have for them.
Yeah, definitely. I think one piece of advice I would give is actually steps 1 and 2. They're really helpful for prioritizing basins, and that's something that you need to do to comply with TNFD and CSRD as well. So I would encourage people to do steps 1 and 2 because there are quite sort of defined methodologies to do that, and it really helps you with compliance and reporting on other, CSRD, which is required for many companies if they've got substantial water or agricultural footprints and biodiversity footprints. So I would encourage people to do those 2 steps. It's got multiple benefits, and it helps you define where you would engage further for target setting. I think another I would say is to identify existing programs that are working on basin management on the ground. There are a few groups here, Alliance for Water Stewardship and others, who are doing things that are context-based with suppliers to try to reduce water use and water quality issues. and try to bring a SBTN lens into that. And it might not necessarily be strictly the pathway of the SBTN, but if you're bringing in partnership from the beginning to that process, it really eases the burden on the stakeholders in the place. It kind of brings a unified message. And at the end of the day, this kind of upstream engagement does tend to need collaboration amongst peers to kind of give that incentive and that unified message. So I would encourage people to start identifying those programs in basins as part of their SBTN readiness almost. And then another one, which is maybe a bit left field, is to think about carbon is something that's been going on for decades, and we're trying to hit these net zero targets, and it has always had a bit of a negative messaging and a struggle sort of publicly because of the fear that it strikes in people. I think biodiversity and nature and water, it can have a much more positive messaging. And I'm seeing a lot of marketing teams and the clients that I work with really inspired by the messaging around these kinds of topics and wanting to put some of their funding into the programs. But then the sustainability team and the marketing team tend to work kind of separately, and the marketing team wants to come out saying something that's maybe too bold, that you can't really kind of evidence, which SBTN helps you strengthen that. So if you talk to your marketing teams, if you're the kind of company that has the resources to do that, talk to your marketing teams early so that you can unify your messaging and your approaches, and maybe share budget in ways to kind of make these substantiated claims. And then the same with charitable arms as well. They tend to be two separate pathways, but if they're brought together, you can get this rigorous evidence-based approach to talking about biodiversity and nature, which is a really inspiring message for many people.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay. I can go next. Yes, in terms of advice, I think the rationale on the why is really about scientists and the entire academic world published many times that climate and biodiversity global goal can't be achieved without global and local nature-related actions. And on this one, SBTN provide you this kind of zoom-dezoom metrics to really adapt those global statements and those global targets to be able to really fit them into a local context. So on this one, it's really, again, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important, especially for corporates, upskilling on how really nature and businesses are interlinked, and that you can't have a future-proof business strategy without included nature into it. Back really more to the topic I know well, water in agriculture. For me, it's really when I'm talking about it to procurement, to management, to anybody else in the company or the functions, as well as marketing. It's really about supply disruption potential issue and science-based targets for nature overall process, and even the step 3 by setting targets allows you to have it in mind. And when you want to set your targets, then you have a more resilient business to avoid potential heavy disruption that, when you look at the water cycle disruption in overall, will happen more and more. So it helps you have the most global view on what all of the different actions, mitigation actions, or potentially adaptation levels as well, you can implement.
Okay, yeah. As you know, that the approach to nature needs to be even more local than GHG reduction. The design concept of SBTN is that the gap between the ideal state for each catchment and the current state is allocated as a target by all of the water users in the catchment. This is a wonderful methodology that takes water issues at the catchment level and translates them into company level targets. However, the issue will not be impacted if only one company in each catchment takes on the target. Your participation is crucial in the activities that impact on the whole catchment. Fortunately, SBTN has a methodology that scientifically selects the catchment in which companies should invest as a priority. There may be some challenges in collecting data at first, but this is an unavoidable process that clarifies the issue to address. The most important attitude is to start with what you can do. Together, we can begin the journey to be a nature-positive planet.
Terrific. All right. Well, this concludes the panel section of our session. Just give a hand to our panelists, and thank you for your remarks. Okay, so we'll go into the next section where we'll talk about, or I'll briefly cover some of the updates to the V1.1 guidance based on insights that we learned from the pilot. So I think we're a little behind on time, so I'm going to touch on these briefly, but we'll obviously these will be available later. So there's a few dimensions that we looked at when we took in the pilot data, when we looked through the validation information, and then we're looking to make updates and try to improve the guidance. So there's 4 main dimensions. One is around clarity and improving how the guidance is written, shown in the guidance, whether it's with pictures or just understanding. There's a lot of verbiage and technical language, and there's been times where we written something in the guidance and it might not have been interpreted in the same way that we had in our head. So that was one aspect. The other is around feasibility. I think that's a little bit self-explanatory, but then also thinking about the robustness of the guidance and maintaining that from a scientific perspective. And then obviously the last one here is ambition. And so, there you go. And steps 1 over here on the left, and I know there's a lot of text here again, but here on the left, there's insights that we learned from the pilot. And then on the right here are ways that we made some direct improvements to the guidance to enhance them. And so in step 1A, during the materiality assessment, one of the insights that we had is that the materiality screening tools are fundamental to starting on the right foot, and they provide a strong foundation for kind of starting the process. And so one of the things SBTN did is develop a new interface to the MST, or the materiality screening tool, so that it's functionally easier to use, it's easier to click around, find the information that you need, and companies are on their way. Steps 1B, value chain assessment. Again, I won't read all these, but there's a number of insights that we had in that process and revisions that we had. Continuing that forward in step 2, in step 2A, determining the target boundary. There's a bit, well, I'm going to talk about this later in another session on agricultural supply chains, but around traceability and some of the enhancements we've done to try and bring that into the guidance and ensure that while there might not be data in some of these areas, or there might be hard to come by, there's ways to move forward and continue to take action. And then finally in step 2C, prioritization, there are some insights. And these are just a summary of like the high level. There's a number of modifications that we made to the V1.1 guidance. And then for freshwater, step 3 for freshwater, we made some changes to the stakeholder consultation process to make it a little bit clearer what to do in areas where there might be various challenges or issues connecting with stakeholder consultations, and then introducing new recommendations on how to do that. And then finally, providing a little bit more of I would say flexibility in the target dates. So originally it was 5 years that companies had to meet their targets, and so depending on the ambition of the target, and then some of the I would say the local stakeholder consultation, to understanding the context there, whether there's other goals locally that stakeholders had, being able to incorporate that in target dates as well. And then finally, this last piece is just a brief summary of how we've optimized the guidance in the short term. Again, this V1.1 is an iteration from the pilot. There are also some longer term updates and things that we've learned that we plan to incorporate in V2. But this is just a brief summary of what we had in this July release. And so I apologize, we had to kind of go through that so quickly, but as we go to the next phase, I want to introduce Angela and the work that her and Rebecca Tharmer are doing on the basin threshold tool.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. All right. Good morning, everyone, online and in person. It's wonderful to see everyone here today. I want to take a second to thank Alan for being our Master of Ceremonies this morning, and for thanking our panelists that joined us this morning. 3 key themes jumped out at me when I was listening to our panelists this morning, and look forward to further conversations. The first, stakeholder engagement, the important need for engaging stakeholders in our catchments. The need for landscape action, collective action within a landscape, and then finally, the science-based approach. As we were putting together the slides for this discussion, we realized it was really challenging because we've been so heads down for the past several months and really deep into the work to try to figure out how to make the basin threshold tool an effective tool for our companies and consultants that want to set science-based targets, but also meaningful and maintaining the integrity of science-based targets. And I imagine that many in the room feel the same tension that we felt between that push for simplicity in creating an out-of-the-box solution that's easy to use and set targets, with that pull of maintaining the integrity of the science that we're working with today. So hopefully my goal for the conversation this morning is to show the simplicity of the work even while maintaining that integrity of the science. I imagine there's going to be a lot of questions. Very happy to engage in conversations throughout the week, and let's go ahead and get started on our journey. So what do I want everyone in this room and online to take away from the conversation today? There are several things, and I need to be able to see the slides. So the first one is the challenges that companies engage in. Yeah, I see, okay. The challenge that companies engage in, so it needs to be easy. It needs to be targets that companies can go into a basin, identify the stakeholders, understand the differences of environmental flows and hydrologic flows to be able to set targets. The basin threshold tool that I'll present here is one developing tool to assist companies in this journey. But the important thing is that it's evolving along with the existing Step 3 methods. That's really the important part about all of this. And our vision for the future, that includes corporate engagement throughout this whole process.
Yeah, good. It's not synced with the, okay.
Awesome. Okay. So the challenge that we have today, sorry, this is an interesting setup. Okay, go with it. It's been a while since I've been talking in person at a conference. So the challenge is a freshwater setting. So as we all know, and the panelists can attest to this morning, it can be cost prohibitive at scale. So there's the cost for one basin, but when a company sources from several basins, that can begin to become a burden for companies to undertake that local target setting. It's very time-consuming, as the stakeholder engagement process attested to in the panelist discussion. Working with different stakeholders requires significant amounts of time and resources companies could otherwise put to action for nature. And then finally, information is not readily available in local basins. There could be a lot of information in some basins, but it could also be very outdated. And that's where the challenge comes in compiling and acquiring all of this information. Now, where there's challenges, there's also opportunities. And so the opportunities for freshwater setting is really looking at the basin threshold tool as a core component to step 3 target setting. So at its core, the basin threshold tool is a database, just to make sure everybody's aligned on the same page of what a tool means, right? And so in language of SBTN, a lot of the tools and information started as the same thing, a database that then became something more. And you'll see throughout that I describe the basin threshold tool as alpha version. So it's alpha version today because it hasn't been tested with our external partners yet. It's been through internal testing, and I'll show how we're going to get from alpha to beta version here in a second. But the data that is critical to the basin threshold tool is at a local level that can help facilitate access through step 3. And it's that information that is going to be compiled throughout a collective iterative process that is stakeholders, methods, models, and supporting material. So not only models that are relevant to the basin threshold tool that will be compiled as in this information. And then environmental flows that will enable more environmentally sustainable water management in governments. That's a very important piece to keep in mind as we go through this. So what are environmental flows? And as you've been going through, as the companies and consultants in the room and online have been going through the target setting process, you see the term environmental flows constantly, but I want to level set a little bit. Environmental flows are not only the hydrologic flows in a basin, they involve the quantity, the timing, the quality of freshwater flows, and the levels necessary that sustain aquatic ecosystems. And I'm so happy to hear that the panelists mentioned the focus on nature, even while looking at holistic systems for climate and beyond. It's really that focus on nature that's the critical need for understanding and bending the curve on biodiversity loss. But in addition, environmental flows can help manage and support human cultures, economies, and sustainable livelihoods and well-being. So it's really that holistic picture of basins that we really want to strive to, that's beyond just reducing flows by 1 millimeter or 5 millimeters or milliliters per year. So I want to show a little example. This is an example of a report that's within the database today. So the database is compiled, as I'll show here in a second, of different information that's collected globally at the local scale. And so this report's just an example from a basin, a reach in Australia, of the different kinds of information that's available. The critical thing to really understand, and we don't need to get into the weeds of like what this stuff is because it's information pulled out from a report, but it shows beyond hydrologic flows. It shows the environmental flows and the flows necessary for, over time, for the benefit of aquatic species. The one thing I want to show on this slide is that really it's a compilation of many different articles. I got to go with this one. Yep, many different articles over time that is from global to local reach that this database is compiling. So it's not only how to implement or assessments in one local basin, but it's really looking at that holistic picture of the global impact at the local scale of what we can do for environmental flows in nature moving forward.
Spread out though, so they can
okay.
see through. Yeah.
So let's switch gears for a second. So I want to talk through now the architecture of the basin threshold tool, and this goes to the database icon on the top left side, really the engagement for companies that I'll talk through here. So in the architecture of the basin threshold tool, we're really looking at the data at the local level. Compiling all those papers that I showed on the previous slide, that was just 1/1000th of 1% of the different environmental flows papers that are out there today, literally hundreds of thousands of papers, reports, assessments, peer-reviewed published papers, etc. The basin threshold tool, while getting started in its alpha version, is beginning to compile all of this information. The data at the local level then can help facilitate that action, ease the burden for companies, and gain access and understanding through the step 3 target setting. The environmental flows information, did I? Oh, that got messed up. Okay. Anyways, next slide. The core data of the basin threshold tool. So there's an existing paper, Messenger et al. 2024, which is basically reflecting the existing core data functionality of the basin threshold tool today. And so while it may seem that there's a lot of different papers, so about 1,300 local e-flows assessments in the database across 25 different countries, it really is geographically not equitable. Most of that, though, in the reporting of that first component of the database, the global e-flows database, was really about compiling information on a time-based approach. So getting stakeholders to engage, getting stakeholders to feedback information, that was a limiting factor in the number of reports and assessments and papers that could be compiled over the given time frame. But looking at the core component of the database today, there's reaches of varying sizes and different eco-hydrological conditions, which is very important to keep in mind throughout this. at least 26 different environmental flows methods. So when I hear models, my mind goes to, through the months of in the weeds work that we've been doing, it goes beyond models to the methods, the processes, the tools, the information gathered to compile information around a local basin. However, so looking at the existing information and the diversity of the locations, there's only a fraction of environmental flows assessments available globally today. So we're just getting started. Again, going back to the alpha designation of the basin threshold tool, we're just getting started. We need company action, and we need the investment by those working in basins to feed back this loop to begin compiling information. So I want to touch on one of the things that that was mentioned this morning, the importance of steps 1 and 2 leading into step 3. So in steps 1 and 2, there are already global databases available or information available from the Water Footprint Network, Aqueduct, the Water Risk Filter from WWF, Aqueduct from World Resources Institute, the State of Nature layers, that are vital tools to use to set priority basins in steps 1 and 2. So through that process then, coming into step 3, you're already ahead of the curve to begin engaging in step 3, the basin threshold tool alpha. Note trademark pending on my very cool diagram on step 3 for basin threshold tool. Okay, so getting into the pathways. So looking at the step 3 pathways to target setting, there's 10 different tasks within 4 steps of setting targets today, and I want to go through and introduce how the basin threshold tool fits into each of these steps. So again, looking at the overarching architecture of the tool today, so it comes in from the top. So looking at the top coming down, you've got steps 1 and 2 already completed. You know the scope of your basins, your priority basins, and you have basically an understanding of where your locations are going to be. So your steps 1 and 2 from the top. I want to pay attention really quickly, though, to the framework. So if you look at environmental flows and cultural flows in the red box in the middle, it's surrounded by 5 different components. So I want to reiterate that it's not just hydrologic flows, which is the blue box on the teal blue box on the bottom left-hand side. So the climate and hydrological data are one component of environmental flows. And then going clockwise around, we look at the ecological assessments and the ecological health of the system. That's really important for driving that aquatic ecosystem diversity. And then the social and cultural aspects of environmental flows and in basins globally today, that's going to be a higher priority in some basins than others. The example of the report that I showed from Australia is one example of a very important critical nature to include rights holders and indigenous populations in terms of that social and cultural aspect of environmental flows and decision making. And you'll see on the bottom right and the bottom left, water quality and groundwater respectively, those are grayed out right now. We're at an inflection point with the basin threshold tool development and moving from alpha to beta version, and in version 1.1 to version 2 of science-based target setting. And the groundwater and water quality are being evolved with the methods. So more to come on that in the coming months. But I want to break this down a little bit more. So looking at the steps holistically, again, task 1, identifying the basin and an activity or a location. So coming in, steps 1 and 2 are critically important. I can't reiterate that enough. And then going into task 2, that's where we look at the holistic model itself, consulting the basin threshold tool alpha, step 1. Is the information that you need from that local basin in the database today? If not, where do I begin to get that information? And then task 3 and task 4 are consulting the national and local stakeholders. So you'll see that's off to the right. However, that's a critical feedback loop within the process. So as companies and consultants begin to understand who are the consultants, who are the stakeholders that we need to work with in given basins, feeding that back into the basin threshold tool so that it becomes more viable for other companies in similar basins to begin to engage in that collective action approach, feeding on itself to build out the tool. And then step 5, selecting the approach. And so the approach that we're showing here is the local approach. One of the panelists recognized that you couldn't necessarily set a local approach or a local threshold in a basin in their pilot study because the information just never came back. It was never ready. So had to revert back to the global approach from Hogeboom et al. 2020. That's perfectly viable system in this basin threshold tool as well. The difference being that over time, as the threshold tool begins to develop more and begins to engage more with the companies and consultants we're working with and others, that the tool itself will identify those global basins, or those basins, excuse me, that may never have local information, that might always need to revert. However, we hope that threshold or that proportion changes over time, which will be very beneficial for us and nature, of course. I've mentioned this a couple times. It's really important to keep this in mind, that the information that we all are gathering from academics, one of the early stages of this several-month process was a multi-day workshop bringing in academic experts and SBTN experts to really drive home the need for the feedback loop for building more and more information in the basin threshold tool. It's critical that the companies working in local basins engage in this process to provide local information, the models, the data, the tools, the processes, the stakeholder information we need to create this feedback loop. And I haven't vetted this with SBTN and the Freshwater Hub yet, but I'm coining this task 11, the feedback loop of supporting information. So you're welcome. Okay, to move from alpha to beta then, what does that mean exactly? Today, the architecture of the tool is designed to function interactively. So we have an interactive, albeit pretty complex, which I reminded you at the beginning, where I'm trying to simplify and keep it easy for now, so I'm just trying to touch on things. The internal testing of the tool application that we've been going through and building out the guidance and criteria to make it more feasible for external application. And then really looking at the initial thoughts around the different levels of thresholds. Is it going to be local? Is it going to be global? Are there regional approaches? How do we modify this within the existing framework of the Step 3 methods? But then moving into the beta version, we really need to get the guidance criteria complete so that we can engage with our external partners, get other data that, as I mentioned on the existing core data, the core functionality today, how do we build in other information that can help? So as an example, environmental flows information or ecological health information about specific aquatic species, how does that information get fed into the holistic basin threshold tool so that we're really looking at the system as a whole and not just focus on one component? Setting the priorities with the confidence that we know will be local or will be global forever. And then, of course, well, as I mentioned, the addition of why ecological and ecohydrological flows are important. But what can you do today? What can companies and consultants do today? There's a lot of text on here, but I'll break it down simply. So today we need that we can say that the alpha version can be utilized by companies today in a very guided way. So what I would recommend is that companies, this is the call to action for you to begin to help us in this co-development process. Where are we missing, with our heads down, really focused on the integrity of the science, what are we missing in terms of that simplicity? Moving down and getting our heads out of the weed to look at the simplicity of how to set these targets in a science-based way. It's essential to pilot this alpha version for a range of different basin contexts. We need to see the variability of contexts that are out there. We can't look at similar basins and hope to get similar results in basins that are very complex and very different. We need the whole scope. So this is a call to action for companies and consultants to participate in this together with us. And then today we have a flexible design, or we're building in this flexible design for adaptive water management so that we can, over time, include revisions for thresholds, over time understand if company A has a threshold that company B in the same basin is extremely different, we need to understand what's happening and why and what's the underlying science behind it. So this is that continued feedback loop that I am impressing upon y'all. And then finally, embedding the basin threshold tool with the social processes, that social and cultural box of the 5 boxes around the core tool. How do we keep embedding that so that we're respecting indigenous populations and rights holders that are so critical to the success for nature and for all of us in these basins? I want to take a second here to thank our technical advisory group. Like I mentioned, we had a workshop earlier this year, multi-day, to really come together. And it's interesting, and I'll share with you all. So half the room was science-based targets implementers, and half the room was very well-respected, very deep thinkers on environmental flow science. And it took literally half the day, because in the morning we were arm waving and we were talking about all these great solutions, and it took at least half the day. And everybody came back in the room and sat down, and we were all like, wow, this is a hard problem. And once everybody realized how hard the problem really was to bring all this together, we pulled up our sleeves and got to work. But I was thinking during that time that with all these people in the room, if they're realizing how hard this problem is, how is everybody that's spread out so geographically diverse across the globe, how is that affecting everybody? So yeah, I understand and appreciate the problem. That's why I'm here. That's why we're all here. And thank you so much for the talk today. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to further conversations with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And Angela, you can stay up here. We're about to go into the Q&A if you're open to that. Yeah. And I'll invite our panelists up as well. So as they're coming to the stage and you all start to think about your questions, just wanted to highlight a few actions that companies can take now. One is to get up to speed. SBTN has produced, as part of V1.1 release, a corporate manual that basically presents the information in a more accessible way to like a sustainability professional in their company, and to kind of walk through some of the steps and the task with each of the steps. The other is the materiality screening tool that I alluded to earlier. SBTN has produced a more interactive version with an app that companies can use to go through that screening. The other is engage with or look through SBTN's service provider list, which is available on SBTN's website. So if you're thinking about starting this process, SBTN has started to list service providers on there that have either worked through the pilot or are working with companies now, and can help you along the way of getting started. And the other is to sign up for SBTN's corporate engagement program. I believe there's over several hundred companies over there on there now, and it's the opportunity to stay informed in the process, also provide input. We have host regular webinars and all kinds of things on there, so encourage you to check that out. So with that, I wanted to open it up to the Q&A. For those online, in the Zoom, feel free to send your questions there on that. And then, sorry. Oh, me? Sorry, I'm off stage. Thank you. Yes, Scott.
Thanks.
Let's start over.
So Scott from Alliance for Water Stewardship. Thanks very much. I really applaud the effort that's going into taking the data from the global to the local, and kind of like calling the companies to kind of take part in that, to gather data and so on and so forth, to make this a viable tool. I have a question about claims, right? It's sort of like the very big words being used here at the opening of your thing. So science. So science implies a level of trust, right? It's a big word. Right place, right place, right actions, right places, right time, right? So you're saying, well, this is the right thing. But you're also pointing at that in the majority of places that you're working in global data sets. So you might not be in the right actions at the right place at the right time. Is there going to be any kind of conversation about tempering claims so that they are global, set by global data sets, local, confirmed by local data sets? So I'm all for kind of like local, global, but let's kind of be realistic about what's actually being claimed here, because it's a lot of big words being used.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you for that, Scott. Yeah, so SBTN is in the process now of developing its claim guidance for companies as part of the pilot, and sharing that with them, and then building that out. And so there is claims guidance that will be part of that. So there's two pieces I see to that. There is like the guidance for language that companies use that have gone through and submitted their targets and have got like a validated, target. And then there's also SBTN will be launching a target dashboard similar to SBTI's dashboard, which will lay out what companies have done in steps 1, 2, and 3, and communicate whether it was a local model, global model, the parts of the materiality assessment that they've like gone through, the parts that they can account for, and things like that. So there will be several ways that that information will be shared and kind of communicated. But as part of that, we are working through like what are like the specific claims that you like companies will have around like, oh, is this set with a global model, local model? What is the time frame for that? What's the time bound? What's the type of target? Is water quality? What kind of water quantity? Things of that sort. So that is something we're very much thinking about. But thank you for that, Scott. I didn't see who was first.
I have a practical question.
Oh, yes, yes.
If people speak, and they just speak up, please, because we're not having microphones. It's a little hard to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see who that is in the back. It's a little dark. Yeah.
Hello, it's Christoph Schmann from the EU Water Facility. I've got a two-part question, if you don't mind, on the basin threshold tool. First, for the cultural flows, very important factor. Is there a scale element to it as populations grow? Is there a limit? Is there a technological limit to that? Do you just have normal low-tech irrigation, or can that expand into pumping stations, treatment plants, etc.? So that was part one. Part two is what sort of outputs are you aiming at? Maybe I missed it, but are there sort of actionable data that is presented and then provided to decision makers, to policy makers? Thank you very much.
I might need you to restate the first part of the question in a second, but the second part of your question, for those that didn't hear it, will there be actionable items coming out of the basin threshold tool, that companies can take? So I guess, so short answer on that, no, not right now. Longer answer on that, really the idea is to provide the documentation, the support, the methods, the models, et cetera, for companies and consultants then to take that information and use it to set thresholds. I don't necessarily envision we'll be able to get to a point where we'll create one click of a button threshold for global basins. I don't think that would fit within the science-based targets integrity. Right, and so, yeah, so I guess shorter answer on that one. Happy to talk about that in more detail. And if you could rephrase your first question, please.
For the cultural flows, we're often talking about indigenous communities that historically are interactive with that basin, with those ecosystems. As those communities might grow and develop modern methods, those needs might expand for water. So instead of a small village, it becomes a town. Instead of using low-tech irrigation, they introduce pumping stations, maybe treatment plants for a water system. How are there limits to that, so that
Awesome. Yeah, I think okay, excellent. I think I captured it now. So the question is, how will the tool evolve along with rights holders evolving in and the cultural flows aspects of environmental flows? This is a question around when does the data become irrelevant, right, or no longer valid? And so we're going to have a constant evolution of this information in the local basins. That's why we'll rely on local stakeholders and the companies working with them to continue to update this information. And Rebecca, who's really the expert in this area, more so than I am on cultural flows, I'll pass it to her to answer this. If you want to come up on the microphone, or
Just to add to that, for the environmental flows, cultural flows part of the tool, it's co-developed and led by the indigenous groups themselves. Right? So they reflect on their direct and indirect relationships and dependencies around water and the environment, and they define their cultural flow requirements, their cultural water needs accordingly. Those link to their rights and responsibilities to actually manage and administer their own water for their own purposes, both in terms of what's required to maintain health, their objectives in terms of a healthy ecosystem, but also their objectives as time goes by, their needs for the water for other purposes, such as water treatment plants, increased domestic water supply, and so on. And those cultural flow requirements are are not static, they're obviously then dynamic over time, and that means that those assessments need to be revisited, and the allocations of water for cultural purposes that they, in many cases, but not all cases, are actually responsible for managing. Those allocations will change adaptively over time. And that's one of those feedback loops that we identify in the tool, is really understanding that the requirements for cultural flows and water right now will be different 5 years down the line. And the responsibility and the leadership for defining how those flows will change is the mandate and the responsibility of, in that case, the indigenous groups themselves in their role as rights holders, with rights to decide where that water goes and for what purposes. What's important is that there are objectives set as part of the environmental flow process and within the tool. Those flows for environmental health and for cultural reasons are set for an objective in terms of the health of the social and ecological system. And those needs change over time. So it's very important, as part of this tool, to distill out what are the objectives that society has for that water, including for nature. Because those objectives are different in different kinds of basins and different groups of people. And as you pointed out, they will change. So that to go to the other question a little bit, it's possible as the rights holders being part of the stakeholder group and the companies being part of the active stakeholders in the basin, there are some ways in which the water allocation dynamics and flow management of the system in the basin, there are ways in which you can engage in that allocation process and thinking about how to adaptively manage those targets for water over time as part of that bigger community dealing with adaptively managing the basin water requirements. So I think there is a potential role for companies to engage in water allocation and water management as one of the effective stakeholders in the basin.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. There was a question over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Kenji Nagata from Japan International Cooperation Agency. And thank you very much, Dr. Indira. My question is very similar to his question. Usually, environmental flow, the meaning of environmental flow does not include in a human necessity of water. Just thinking about the natural environment and ecosystem. And I think that kind of evaluation and setting up the threshold all over the world, that is very great effort to set up the target of the environmental flow. But I think the problem is how do we keep the environmental flow? In the river basins, some other, human beings need and use the water there. So at that time, the problem is how do you work out differences between environmental flow and human water necessary to utilized by human being. So I think that's a great idea to set up the environmental flow all over the world, but how do you realize that environmental flow? That is a very important and necessary action, I think. So if you have some idea, could you explain? Thank you very much. Thank you.
I love the easy questions. That's awesome. Yeah. That's the core focus of the work, really, right? Because if you look at hydraulics, it's humans using water for human use, right? If you look at hydrology, it's recognizing water for human use, but also how the basin or how streams can manage that flow of water. Then you start to throw in aquatic ecosystem health and eco-hydrological health, and that's how is the health maintained of the river and reach for aquatic ecosystems and those other parts of nature that depend on flows. Then you've got the cultural and social flows, right? So yeah, the human element touches on all of it, But I think it's very important to keep in mind that we're just a part of the system, not above and beyond the other parts of the system. And I'll pass to Rebecca to add additional flavor.
It's obviously a very challenging part of basin water management, and it's the environmental and or cultural part of that water management process. One part of the tool really makes that connection to the governance and management system and the water allocation process, because environmental flows don't sit in isolation of that. The quantities of water for the environment, those are calculated outside of that trade-off discussion. So those amounts of water are brought into then alongside the requirements for other sectors that need water as well. And then there's a discussion, well, how can we meet as best as possible everyone's objectives for water. What's important with the environmental flow assessments, many of them that are in our database, is that they are aligned with the basin water management vision. So there's typically those assessments that are done under the mandate of the government agencies dealing with water, the Water Authority, the basin organization that's involved. The objectives for setting water for the environment are nested within the basin vision and the basin water management objectives. So they are clearly enough in line that it's possible to see where there might be difficulties around meeting multiple needs. But ultimately, this goes back to the importance of being in that stakeholder process to actually recognize, firstly, we've got these requirements for the environment, including those for cultural purposes. How do those relate to water allocation more widely? Where are the areas where it's easy to meet multiple objectives or not? And then the trade-offs around that. And that means it's an iterative process. And that's done usually as part of the water management process. But the tool makes those connections explicitly to that wide water allocation. Many of the assessments have in the database have not gone through much of that adaptive management, but some have multiple cycles. And so some of the examples for certain basins can show very clearly how that adaptive process works to be able to make sure you can at least, if not fully, partially meet the environmental water needs in that basin and move in the direction of greater sustainability for the natural system and for those communities that more directly depend on the water for their needs. So at least you get that conversation and that interaction started. And the other thing to point to the tool is that we recognize in some places we have insufficient information on the needs for the water for the environment, but we start in a precautionary way, which tends to be in a higher amount for the environment at first, while we actually look more carefully at where we can reach some compromised agreement on what water might be needed. So going for a precautionary principle, using a precautionary principle is fundamentally very important. And the guidance around the tool pulls out some of those principles around water allocation and precautionary nature of the approach to deal with this issue that's very hard and it takes time.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question of the panel really quick? So based on everything from your pilot experiences and what you've heard today about the start of the basin threshold tool, is there something that through your unique experiences and the unique basins you've been working in, something that you would like to see in the tool or that is missing or that would have helped maybe move your experience and journey along a little bit better and a little bit farther?
Yeah. Actually, the focus on each local watershed is very difficult for companies, maybe so to gather the kinds of local, this kinds of irrigation data and the pumping data, that kinds of. So, and to understand each local watershed situation, we have to gather the information from the kinds of local situation. So I mean, but the depending on the countries, depending on the region, the data accessing is a very different situation. So, for example, in Japan, we can access the kinds of official data set, but the kinds of the local government administration has their own data to manage the kinds of the local watersheds. So that is the confidential data set for the administration. We cannot access. So, if there are any the kinds of co-benefit or share the kinds of issued, we can access. That is the big hurdle, but the dialogue is very important. So the scientific approach is needed the kinds of the stakeholder engagement process. So it's the opposite thing, but very important process, I think.
And yeah, if I may add on the topic, potentially the water quality is very important for us. We are a food and beverage industry. We rely on agriculture, using a lot of products. And at some point when we were setting the target on the freshwater SBTN pilot, it is something that we were potentially hoping as well to better appreciate. We talk a lot about nitrogen, phosphorus. What about herbicides? And how can this be really much more included in a science-based targets approach?
Thank you.
And I think from my perspective, it was a lot to take in. So I can't critique it like in detail. But I would say that something that would be really helpful to see is sort of a prepared analysis of which industries are using and putting pressure on basins in different areas. Because I think I often come back to this point of like the need for collaboration and people to unify their requests in a basin and to be kind of strategic in what they do, because anytime there's a corporate expectation to engage on any topic in their supply chain, there's a bombardment of requests on that location and the suppliers in that location. And then that can create fatigue and sort of people trying to cut around it or not really fully engage in the process. So if there's anything that can be done to ease the burden on companies on steps 1 and 2, where they're individually doing things to come up with fairly similar data sets and potentially fairly similar results to highlight similar basins if they're in the same industry, it would be great if there's something that would unify that a little bit and facilitate the process of identifying basins that they can work in together because they have similar impacts and similar interests in it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
And if I may, because I don't know if who it may be addressed in terms of sharing feedbacks on the users of SBTN, we are really focusing on blue water in the freshwater targets. But again, relying on agriculture, I mean, 80% of the land use is rain-fed. And it would be very fantastic if green water could as well be included in the freshwater targets methodology overall. Also, because I'm leveraging the experience we had on the land target setting, which is only focused on footprint, which does not as well include how agriculture can restore, potentially provide some soil health impact on the quality of the soil itself. And as today, data is really translating as a science, very trust-based. If we are only focusing our emphasis on footprint, on quantity, on blue water, then we completely overlooked one potential lever that can provide more resilience and more access to water for the future.
Yeah, no, that's oh, sorry, we're going to say.
I was agreeing.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you for that. That's something that we've talked about in the hub as in terms of like the scope of the guidance and building out what are some of the next kind of phases of what we include. And so green water has been a topic that we've kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit on, but it is something that is on our radar in terms of, that's okay. Yeah, as well. And so, thank you for that feedback on both the land piece and the green water footprint. And I'll just add, so folks are aware, so we're already starting to look ahead to V2 and working on that, obviously, with pieces of basin threshold tool. The other is groundwater. Right now, the guidance kind of stipulates that companies can set targets where they're largely where there are only local models available. There's not like a global kind of approach to that. And so that's something that we're going to be looking at and trying to expand for the next phase, and then the other is, well, there's a number of things, but the other big kind of ticket item is around water quality and expanding that to toxic chemicals. And obviously there's a lot of toxic chemicals in there, but trying to identify what are some key ones that we can try and incorporate there to invite other kind of industries and sectors into the space in terms of impacts on water. So thank you for your feedback. Mm-hmm. There's a question over here, or
there is an online question if there's time.
I think so. Yes,
Okay.
yes, we've.
Yeah, this is from Ashish Bhardwaj from AWS, and he asks, how do you ensure the accuracy and reliability of local data, and how do you overcome challenges in areas with limited data availability or inconsistent reporting? If you could just
Yeah, in 3 minutes. Yeah. Did that come through on the? Sorry. There's two questions about that came through online about the accuracy of the data and then the local data. Okay.
local data and what to do in places where there's limited.
What to do in limited. Okay. Yeah. So I'll take the first part first. So what we as SBTN and the Freshwater Hub try to do is not kind of like decide on what what is the appropriate kind of local data for communities, and so that's why the stakeholder consultation and engagement process is so key, and deferring to local communities to kind of identify what are those models and data and thresholds, and to ground truth or corroborate what the global models or the local models say. And so we prescribe what are some of the kind of criteria that communities should think about in terms of environmental flows and variety of aspects that we lay out in the guidance. But that's something that we tend to defer to the local communities in terms of kind of identifying what is appropriate. And then the second one, in terms of areas where there are more sparse data or perhaps less engagement on water as a whole. So that's something that we don't necessarily address in the guidance, but there are some recommendations that we provide to companies to help navigate that. That's kind of separate in the freshwater guidance, but to kind of identify who those stakeholders might be, where you might access that data, how you might engage them. And so there's a stakeholder consultation guidance that was released with V1.1. That's kind of a separate document that we put out to kind of help kind of navigate that, and we look to enhance that as we go forward. And then, so I think we're close to time, or we're at time. I'm going to perhaps stop the Q&A process, and I just want to offer tremendous thanks to our panelists, our speakers today. There's a number of you in the room that have been, I've been working in this space for a few years now, and I've learned a lot from you all, and I really appreciate, you all's input and collaboration on this guidance. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you for being here, and welcome to World Water Week. Thank you.